Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Delano D'Souza. The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz is at the heart of the Memorandum of Understanding, which has been signed between the United States and Iran. Under the terms of the deal, the U.S. will immediately lift its blockade of Iranian ports. The Islamic Republic, for its part, will reopen the Strait of Hormuz and charge no toll for commercial vessels for a 60-day period. However, the presence of sea mines in the vital waterway could be a cause for concern. Our correspondent Reza Sayah traveled in the Strait of Hormuz and filed this report.
Deep inside the Strait of Hormuz, ship after ship, stuck, sitting in waiting. The outcome of a nearly 4-month-long double blockade, one by Iranian forces, the other by the U.S. Navy, that cut the world's oil flow and inflicted global economic pain. The United Nations says the competing blockades have stranded hundreds of ships and thousands of crew members.
All right, this looks like an Iranian oil tanker. It has an Iranian flag. We're going to see if we can talk to someone on board, see what they're carrying and how long they've been here. خسته نباشید. چند وقته اینجا لنگر زدین؟
نمیتونیم جواب بدیم متاسفانه.
I asked them how long they've been anchored here, and they say they're not allowed to talk.
Tehran and Washington say with the Memorandum of Understanding to be signed on Friday, both sides will lift their blockades, allowing ships to finally pass through. But the two sides seemingly still at odds over Tehran's call for a payment system. Washington says Iran cannot charge fees for ships to pass. Tehran says it can. On Hormuz Island, one of more than a dozen islands sitting on the strait, Iranians celebrate what they call their victory over the United States. Esmail Hormozi says the strait is more than just a waterway.
What runs through our veins, what's in our blood are the waters of the strait.
Mohammad Neek says the strait helped Iran to victory.
God wanted this strait to exist to help our strategy, for the people of Iran, for the entire world.
A world that felt the economic pain when the Strait of Hormuz shut down and now wait for it to open back up.
To understand what the MOU means for the future of maritime trade, Gulf states and energy security, we can bring in Dan Marks, Research Fellow for Energy Security at RUSI in London. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Now, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz inflicted immense pain on the global economy. We saw those energy shortages in large parts of the world, whether we're talking about Asia, Africa, here in Europe as well. How long will it take, realistically, for things to get back to normal?
Well, thank you for having me on. Well, some time, I think, is the answer. Potentially, it's likely that the energy trade through Hormuz and from the Gulf it will be permanently changed. There may be some permanent reduction, but certainly it will take some time for flows to return close to where they were, volumes being produced and coming through the strait. There's plenty of material there from LNG, oil products and storage kind of waiting to come out. But restarting the, getting enough ships through the strait, refilling inventories, getting refineries back up and running, or back to using Middle Eastern crude, will take time, and this will be a kind of process over a year, possibly, certainly several months. In the case of LNG, a few weeks to get the LNG trains up and running, but 2 trains also damaged, and they'll take several years, or at least 1 year to repair. So there's a lot that needs to happen before things go back to normal, and a lot that could go wrong before then to kind of put us back to square one.
Why, in your opinion, have oil prices gone down so fast so quickly?
But it's been an interesting feature of this whole conflict. Everybody beforehand, I think, would have expected that prices would become much higher given the significance of Hormuz. I think several factors clearly kind of come together. One is that there has been this persistent expectation that the strait will open. It's the closure of the strait that causes the fundamental problem, and that the oil and gas industry can weather the storm until that point. I think as we approached the summer, that became more and more questionable. I think it already was, but so far it's not proven a terrible bet from the people who are setting the prices and who are trading on this. So it really depends. The price now will have fallen because the expectation is that traffic will begin to move and that this will be sustained, and that the Trump administration has no appetite for this to continue and is able to control the situation. I think a lot of geopolitical and political analysts would question that and say that there ought to be more risk priced into this. There is a lot that could cause the strait to be closed, and this is fundamentally a kind of political agreement, which will be politically monitored. There's no kind of referee deciding whether terms have been met. So, nobody knows, and so nobody knows what the price should be. This is an unprecedented situation. So,
it's clear that we're in uncharted territory here, but something that the MOU document suggests is that the Strait of Hormuz will open immediately. This once the U.S. lifts its blockade, and then the Iranians lift will reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But realistically, how can that happen until the waterway is demined?
Well, there's a lot of conditionality around this as well in the agreement. So a lot is open to interpretation. So the US will withdraw its blockade in proportion to how much transit is going through compared to how many ships were going through before. So that's open to interpretation. The US needs to withdraw its forces from within the vicinity of Iran. What does that mean? There's a lot kind of around what it means to open the strait and what free passage means, what do fees, what does no charge mean, that remains to be determined. In practice, Iran is likely able to direct ships safely through the strait, but this will take some time to set up. Demining can take place. The French and British mission is being prepared, and they may deploy if there's perhaps a bit more certainty on this. But that will take a bit of time. So effectively, ships should be able to transit if they are confident in the agreement, if they're confident that they won't be attacked, and if Iran is able to direct them, and depending on what fee they potentially charge for that.
Okay, so we don't have a timeline on how long this demining operation would take. Another thing about this MOU that's been signed is that Iran would not be charging a toll on commercial shipping for a 2-month period. But then afterwards, we don't know. This could potentially become a source of revenue for the Islamic Republic, the Strait of Hormuz.
Certainly. And I mean, even within that 2-month period, there's a question as to what no charge really means. If Iran is providing a service of piloting ships or helping to pilot them through the strait, that is legal to charge under international law. Denmark does that. So it's not unheard of. So the question might be, what do they mean by that? After that point, certainly there's potential that Iran will want to charge for certain services. And in the agreement, that's referenced in terms of there needing to be a negotiation with regional partners, and that needs to be in line with international law. But as I say, there is precedent, and it is allowed in international law to charge for services, and those services don't have a kind of set fee or a cap. So a lot still to be determined on that.
Dan, from what you have read of this MOU, who do you think has come out on top in terms of who gains the most? And does it seem that the Islamic Republic has found the US's and the world's Achilles heel in the Strait of Hormuz?
Yes, I mean, I think that the Strait of Hormuz was well known as the world's Achilles heel before the conflict, and that's been proven now. I think in terms of who comes out on top, it's hard to say, as time will tell to some extent. But I mean, certainly if you look at the agreement, the US gives up a huge amount of economic leverage in this agreement. It agrees to terminate sanctions, grant access to funds that have been held in escrow. These are quite significant points of leverage that have been used in previous negotiations with Iran. And this is before the negotiations over a final settlement even begin. And then when you set that alongside all of the kind of vague wording, which effectively allows both sides to monitor, say, what happens in Lebanon, and to decide that means that they want to resume closing the strait or a blockade, it basically leaves the US in, I think, a weaker position compared to before the war, when really Iran looked on the ropes after the attacks last year. It looks very much weakened, but now comes out with sanctions removed, with no real commitment on nuclear, with the ability to reclose the strait, and with this basically being built into the wording of the agreement. So it's hard to say that the US has come out with much based on what they intended to get when they went in.
I have to talk about Gulf countries because, of course, they were held hostage with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, most of them, and they were also directly impacted after the Islamic Republic started hitting out at them, essentially, directly. Given all of this, will they be forced, Gulf states like the United Arab Emirates, like Saudi Arabia, for instance, be forced to look at diversification and quicken the pace of that, given that energy markets can be upended with the simple closure of a strait of a waterway?
I think the Gulf states are in a very difficult position now. Whether diversification is not necessarily a simple option either. You have to attract a huge amount of investment. A lot of the investment was coming from oil revenues. They also have the option of diversifying infrastructure, building new pipelines that bypass the Strait of Hormuz. That looks very likely to happen. But overall, can they attract the same level of investment into the region that they did before, when there's this perennial threat while the regime in Iran is in place, that the Hormuz could be shut, that there could be drones and missiles flying across the Persian Gulf? It's a very different investment environment from what it looked like at the start of the year. And I think the Gulf states as well are reconsidering their strategic position. They have to deal with an Iran that looks quite much stronger than it did before, with allies who have shown they can't really protect them necessarily. So what do they do to appease Iran? How do they secure themselves? How do they hunker down for what might be a slightly more difficult economic spell? All of that, I think, puts them in a very difficult position.
And could this also have benefits for the United States in being a global energy supplier?
I think that's a difficult question, because you're weighing the benefits of the oil industry against the American economy. The US is the largest producer of oil in the world, but it's not an oil and gas economy. Like the vast proportion of the US economy is not oil and gas. So, inflation, energy prices, they're hit, especially with oil inflation, just as much as everybody else. It's hard, if not impossible, for the US government to mitigate the impact on oil, and gas it's less severe. And so I don't think so. Like, ultimately, there's a reason why Donald Trump, in both of his election campaigns, called for lower oil prices.
I mean, yeah, he seems to have gotten that for now. Dan, Marks, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. And that's it for this edition of Middle East Matters. Thank you very much for watching.